In the 6th century, the court of Constantinople stood at the center of imperial power. Palaces, ceremonies, and political alliances shaped the lives of those who belonged to the aristocracy. Within this environment lived Anastasia, a noblewoman known for her virtue and respected even by the Emperor Justinian himself. Widowed while still young, she faced a future that promised comfort, influence, and security. Yet the world of the imperial capital did not hold her heart. Beneath the splendor of court life, she perceived a deeper calling, one that required distance from ambition, reputation, and public recognition. Widowed while still young, she faced a future that promised comfort, influence, and security. Yet the world of the imperial capital did not hold her heart. Beneath the splendor of court life, she perceived a deeper calling, one that required distance from ambition, reputation, and public recognition. Anastasia belonged to the aristocratic circles of Constantinople during the reign of Emperor Justinian. Her family held high status, and she lived within the refined environment of the imperial capital. Those who knew her recognized in her a character marked by restraint, dignity, and deep moral seriousness. Despite the advantages surrounding her, Anastasia showed little attachment to the privileges of court life. Wealth and influence did not captivate her attention. Her widowed state gradually turned her thoughts toward a different form of devotion, one that required distance from the ambitions that governed the imperial city. At some point, she made a decisive choice. Without public announcement or ceremony, she quietly left Constantinople and traveled to Alexandria. The move itself required courage. Leaving the capital meant abandoning protection, reputation, and the familiar structures that defined aristocratic existence. Near Alexandria, she established a small monastic dwelling and began living in disciplined prayer. The life she embraced replaced courtly routines with fasting, contemplation, and silence. Her days were shaped by the rhythm of devotion rather than the expectations of social position. Years passed in this hidden manner until an unexpected development changed her situation. After the death of his own wife, Emperor Justinian began searching for Anastasia. Reports of her virtue had remained vivid in the imperial memory, and the emperor considered the possibility of bringing her back to Constantinople. When Anastasia learned of this search, she understood that her solitude was no longer secure. The life she had chosen required deeper concealment. In response, she traveled into the desert to seek guidance from the ascetic elder Abba Daniel, whose wisdom was widely respected among the monastic communities of Egypt. Abba Daniel listened carefully as Anastasia explained the danger surrounding her. The emperor's interest meant that any trace of her identity could eventually lead imperial officials to the desert communities. Protecting her solitude required more than relocation. It required the complete concealment of her identity. The elder therefore devised an unusual solution. Anastasia would live as a monk under the name Anastasius, presenting herself as a eunuch ascetic. Such a disguise allowed her to remain within the monastic world without attracting attention. The transformation marked the beginning of a life entirely hidden from public recognition. Daniel led her to one of the most remote caves within the desert skeet. The location was intentionally isolated, far from the common paths traveled by monks and pilgrims. There she would remain in strict enclosure, leaving the cave neither for conversation nor for ordinary monastic gatherings. The rule he gave her was simple but severe. She was to devote herself to prayer in silence, receiving no visitors and revealing nothing of her identity. Only one trusted monk would know the place. Each week he would bring a small portion of bread and a jar of water, leaving them quietly at the entrance. Within this narrow space, Anastasia began a life of solitude, unlike anything she had known before. The silence of the cave replaced the noise of Constantinople. Time was measured by prayer, fasting, and contemplation, rather than by the ceremonial rhythms of imperial society. Those who heard of the solitary ascetic believed that a eunuch monk named Anastasia lived within the cave. None suspected that the hermit hidden there had once belonged to the highest circles of the Byzantine court. The transformation was complete, and her former identity disappeared from the world. Years passed in the quiet enclosure of the cave. Anastasia's life unfolded within a narrow physical space, yet expanded inwardly through prayer. The routine established by Abba Daniel remained unchanged. Bread and water appeared each week at the entrance, and the hermit continued the discipline entrusted to her. The desert environment shaped the rhythm of those years. Silence, heat, and solitude removed the distractions that once surrounded her in Constantinople. The cave became both dwelling and sanctuary. Within that small chamber, she cultivated a life of uninterrupted prayer and contemplation. Her hidden identity remained intact throughout this long period. Monks of the region believed that a solitary ascetic named Anastasia lived within the cave. The secrecy protected her from the search that might have drawn imperial attention back to her life. This concealment also demanded endurance. The discipline of enclosure meant the absence of ordinary human contact. Conversation, community gatherings, and even the shared prayer of the monastery remained distant. Her devotion unfolded almost entirely in solitude. Over the years, the cave became a place marked by perseverance. The quiet faithfulness of her hidden life demonstrated that sanctity does not depend upon visibility. The world had forgotten Anastasia of Constantinople, yet the spiritual work of her life continued in silence. For 28 years she remained within that enclosure. The woman once known within the imperial court had become a hermit known only to a few. Her transformation revealed the depth of her commitment to the path she had chosen. After many years in solitude, Anastasia received a revelation that her earthly life was approaching its end. Knowing that her death was near, she prepared quietly for the final moment of her ascetic journey. She wrote a brief message for Abba Daniel upon a fragment of pottery and placed it at the entrance of the cave. When the monk who brought her weekly provisions discovered the message, it was delivered quickly to the elder. Abba Daniel understood its urgency and immediately traveled to the cave with a disciple, carrying everything necessary for burial, according to the customs of the monastic community. When they arrived, they found the hermit still alive. The elder confessed her and gave her Holy Communion, completing the final sacramental preparation before death. At his request, the ascetic known as Anastasia offered a blessing to the elder and to the monk who accompanied him. Shortly afterward, she commended her spirit to God with the words of prayer, "Lord, into thy hands I commend my spirit." Her death came peacefully, bringing to an end nearly 3 decades of hidden ascetic life within the cave. As they prepared the body for burial, Abba Daniel instructed his disciple to dress the deceased monk in his outer garment. While placing the monastic clothing upon the body, the disciple discovered that the hermit was in fact a woman. The revelation stunned him, though he remained silent until they returned to the monastery. Only then did the disciple ask the elder whether he had known the truth. Abba Daniel confirmed it and recounted the entire story of Anastasia's life. The account of her hidden ascetic struggle was later written down and spread widely, preserving the memory of the noble woman who had chosen a life entirely concealed from the world. Saint Anastasia the Patrician left behind a life that many would have considered desirable. Wealth, status, and proximity to imperial power stood within her reach. Yet she chose another path, one marked by concealment, silence, and the quiet discipline of prayer within the desert. For nearly 3 decades, she lived unknown to the world, her identity hidden even from those who brought her daily sustenance. Her transformation from noblewoman of Constantinople into the solitary ascetic, Anastasia reveals the depth of a decision guided by devotion rather than recognition. The Church remembers her not for public acts of authority, but for the perseverance of a life lived entirely before God. Through the prayers of Saint Anastasia, the Patrician of Alexandria, may we learn the strength found in humility and the freedom that comes from a heart detached from the honors of the world.